The air on the Sparrow Fall was sharp with the tang of coolant and recycled oxygen, but Lyra Kane barely noticed as she sprinted down the corridor. Emergency klaxons blared in her ears, their shrill wails underscored by the distant, bone-rattling thuds of enemy weapons hammering the hull. She clutched the Iron Seed data core tightly against her chest, its faint hum a grim reminder of the secret she carried. "Commander Kane, report!" barked Captain Rourke's voice over the comm. His tone was tense, urgent. "I have the core," Lyra replied, her breath coming in quick bursts. "What's the situation topside?" "We've lost aft shields, and the Valniks are boarding. They're after the same thing you are. Get to the escape pods, now!" Lyra skidded to a stop at a junction. The corridor ahead was dimly lit, with sparks raining down from a damaged power conduit. She hesitated, her mind racing. Abandoning ship meant leaving the Sparrow Fall and its crew to certain destruction. The thought burned in her chest, but she knew Rourke was right. If the Valniks got their hands on the Iron Seed, humanity wouldn't just lose a battle, it could lose the war. "I'm on my way," she said, forcing her legs to move. The sound of metal groaning under pressure rippled through the ship, followed by the sharp hiss of decompressing air. Lyra rounded a corner, nearly colliding with Ensign Oren, a young engineer clutching a plasma cutter. "Commander!" he gasped. "The Valniks, they've breached Deck 12. We're trying to hold them off, but—" "Get to the escape pods," Lyra ordered. "That's an order." "But—" "Go!" Oren hesitated for a moment, then nodded and disappeared down the adjacent corridor. Lyra pressed forward, her boots pounding against the metal floor. The ship groaned again, shuddering as another explosion rocked its core. Over the comm, Captain Rourke's voice cut through the chaos. "They're closing in, Lyra. I'm initiating the self-destruct sequence. This ship isn't falling into their hands." "What?" "No! There are still people. They knew what they signed up for." Rourke interrupted, his voice steady despite the situation. "This is bigger than any of us. Make it count, Kane." Lyra clenched her jaw, swallowing the lump in her throat. She didn't have time to argue. "Understood," she said, her voice tight. The escape pod bay was ahead, the reinforced doors partially open. Beyond them, the soft glow of the pod's guidance lights was a beacon of hope in the chaos. Lyra darted inside, slamming her fist against the console to seal the doors. "Captain Rourke," she said into the comm. "Thank you. Do us proud," came his reply, and then the line went dead. Lyra slid into the nearest pod, strapping herself into the seat. The data core pulsed faintly in her hands as she keyed in the launch sequence. A sharp hiss filled the air as the pod detached from the Sparrow Fall. Through the viewport, she watched the ship grow smaller, its battered hull illuminated by the fiery glow of Valnik's warships surrounding it. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, a blinding flash erupted as the Sparrow Fall's reactor detonated, taking half the enemy fleet with it. Lyra shielded her eyes, her heart heavy. Captain Rourke and the crew had bought her time. She couldn't let their sacrifice be in vain. The data core flickered to life, displaying a string of encrypted text across its surface. Lyra frowned, studying the unfamiliar symbols. Then, a synthesized voice spoke, calm and detached. "Iron Seed activation protocol incomplete. Locate the Harbinger." Lyra's breath caught. "The Harbinger?" she muttered. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" Before she could delve deeper, a warning chime echoed through the pod. A Valnik scout ship loomed on the scanner, its sleek, obsidian hull cutting through space like a predator stalking its prey. "Damn it!" Lyra hissed. She gripped the controls, maneuvering the pod into the shadow of a nearby asteroid field. The scout ship's sensors would struggle in the dense debris, but it was a risky gambit. One wrong move, and she'd be pulverized. The pod shuddered as the scout ship's weapons fired, a plasma bolt skimming too close for comfort. Lyra grit her teeth, weaving through the jagged rocks. Her fingers flew over the console, overriding the pod's safety protocols to push its engines to their limit. "Come on!" she muttered, adrenaline surging. "Hold together." The Valnik ship followed, its weapons lighting up the asteroid field, Lyra's focus narrowed, every muscle in her body taut as she dodged incoming fire. Sweat dripped down her temple, but she didn't dare wipe it away. A sharp alarm blared, and Lyra's heart sank. The scout ship had locked onto her pod with the tractor beam. She slammed her fist against the console in frustration, but before she could act, the beam faltered. A burst of laser fire tore through the scout ship, sending it spiraling out of control. Lyra's pod shook violently as the shockwave rippled through the field. When the chaos subsided, she looked out the viewport to see a new vessel, a human resistance frigate, battered but operational. "This is the Resolute." A gruff voice crackled over the comm. "Identify yourself." "Lieutenant Commander Lyra Kane, Terran Defense Force," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within her. There was a pause, then the voice returned, softer this time. "You're safe now, Commander. Dock with us, we'll take it from here." Lyra exhaled, the tension in her chest easing just slightly. She wasn't safe, not really. Not until the Iron Seed was secured. But for now, she had allies, and that was more than she could have hoped for. As the pod maneuvered toward the Resolute, Lyra cast one last glance at the void where the Sparrowfall had been. "We'll make it count," she whispered. The data core pulsed faintly in her lap, as if in agreement. The Resolute's docking bay was a controlled chaos of activity. Smoke from recent repairs hung in the air, mingling with the sharp tang of scorched metal. Lyra Kane stepped off the escape pod, the Iron Seed data core clutched tightly against her chest. The Resistance crew eyed her with a mix of suspicion and curiosity, their soot-streaked faces showing the wear of a hard life among the stars. "Lieutenant Commander Kane, I presume," came a voice. Lyra turned to see Commander Elias Varick, the Resolute's captain, approaching. He was a tall man with a lean, sinewy frame, his sharp blue eyes scanning her like a predator assessing prey. His uniform was patched and frayed, but his posture exuded authority. "That's me," Lyra replied, her tone clipped. She was too tired for formalities. "Follow me," Varick said, gesturing toward a corridor. Lyra hesitated, her instincts warning her not to trust too quickly. But with the Valnyx still hunting her, she had little choice. The command deck of the Resolute was cramped and dimly lit, its consoles buzzing with outdated but functional technology. Varick led her to a central table displaying a holographic map of the surrounding sector. "Mind explaining why the Valnyx blew half their fleet apart chasing you?" Varick said, crossing his arms. Lyra set the data core on the table, its faint glow casting eerie shadows on their faces. "This," she said. "The Iron Seed." One of the officers, a wiry woman with a cybernetic arm, leaned closer. "What's so special about it?" "It's classified," Lyra replied, her tone firm. Varick raised an eyebrow. "Classified doesn't cut it out here. My ship, my rules. If you want our help, you tell us everything." Lyra took a deep breath. She hated being backed into a corner, but the survival of humanity outweighed her pride. "The Iron Seed is a research initiative," she began. "It's designed to unlock humanity's full potential, physical, mental, and adaptive." Varick frowned. "That's vague." "That's all I know," Lyra admitted. "But the Valnyx see it as a threat. If they get their hands on it, humanity's already slim chances of survival vanish." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the crew. "So, what's the plan?" Varick asked. "The Corps mentioned something called the Harbinger," Lyra said. "It uploaded partial coordinates to an abandoned colony, Halcyon Prime. I need to get there." Varick exchanged a glance with his crew. "Halcyon Prime? That place has been dead for decades. Whatever you're looking for is probably scrap." "I don't have the luxury of ignoring leads," Lyra countered. Varick studied her for a moment, then sighed. "Fine. We'll take you there. But if this mission puts my crew in danger, you're on your own." "Understood," Lyra said, her voice resolute. The Resolute slipped into faster-than-light travel, the ship's engines humming steadily. In the cramped quarters assigned to her, Lyra sat cross-legged on the bunk, studying the Iron Seed core. Its surface shimmered faintly, as if alive. "You better be worth it," she muttered, placing it on the console. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Ensign Orin, the young engineer she'd ordered to the escape pods back on the Sparrow Fall, poked his head in. "Commander," he said hesitantly, I wanted to thank you for getting us out." Lyra managed a small smile. "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of the woods." Orin lingered, then blurted, "Do you really think the Iron Seed can save us?" Lyra's expression hardened. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I'll die trying to make sure it does." Orin nodded, his youthful face showing a flicker of hope. "Well, if you need help, I'm good with tech." "I'll keep that in mind," Lyra said, and Orin left. The journey to Halcyon Prime wasn't smooth. Midway through their route, the Resolute's sensors lit up with warnings. "Valnyx hunters," Varric growled, gripping the edge of his console. "Two ships closing fast." Lyra rushed to the bridge, her heart pounding. "They must have tracked the core," she said. "Great," Varric snapped. "Your classified toy just put us in their crosshairs." The Resistance frigate was no match for the Valnyx's superior firepower. As the enemy ships closed in, Lyra's mind raced. "Hide in the asteroid field," she suggested, pointing to the holomap. "Are you insane?" Varric barked. "They'll be forced to rely on visual targeting," Lyra argued. "We can use the debris for cover." Varric hesitated, then barked orders to the crew. "Helm, take us in!" The Resolute dove into the asteroid field, its hull groaning under the strain of evasive maneuvers. The Valnyx followed, their sleek black ships weaving through the debris like predators. "Hold them off," Varric commanded. The bridge erupted into chaos as laser fire streaked through the void. Lyra grabbed a headset, coordinating with gunners to target weak points in the asteroid field, creating barriers to slow their pursuers. A sudden impact threw her against the console. "What was that?" she shouted. "Shields down to 40%, an officer called out. "Deploy countermeasures," Varric ordered. Explosive charges launched from the Resolute, detonating in the path of the Valnyx ships. One was caught in the blast, its hull splitting apart. The second ship, however, pressed on. "They're locking weapons," the sensor officer warned. Lyra's mind raced. Then she spotted an unusually dense cluster of asteroids ahead. "Thread through that gap," she said to the helm. "You're insane!" "Do it!" The Resolute skimmed through the narrow passage, debris scraping its hull. The Valnyx ship followed but clipped an asteroid, spinning out of control. Cheers erupted on the bridge, but Lyra stayed focused. "We're not safe yet. Keep moving." The Resolute emerged from the asteroid field hours later, battered but intact. Halcyon Prime loomed ahead, its surface a patchwork of craters and abandoned settlements. "Welcome to paradise," Varric muttered. Lyra leaned forward, her gaze fixed on the desolate planet. Somewhere down there lay the Harbinger, and perhaps humanity's last hope. As the Resolute descended toward the surface, Lyra felt a mix of anticipation and dread. Whatever awaited them on Halcyon Prime, there was no turning back. The Resolute touched down with a jarring thud, its landing thrusters kicking up clouds of red dust. Halcyon Prime stretched out before Lyra Kane like a graveyard of human ambition, abandoned structures slumped against jagged cliffs, and the skeletal remains of vehicles lay half-buried in the sands. The air shimmered with heat, tinged faintly with the scent of rust and decay. "Not exactly a welcoming committee," Varric muttered as he joined Lyra at the boarding ramp. "No one's been here in decades," Lyra replied, gripping the iron seed core tightly. "That's why it's the perfect hiding place." Behind them, Orin and Tessa, Varric's second-in-command, descended the ramp, their weapons drawn. Tessa's cybernetic arm glinted in the sunlight as she scanned their surroundings. "Let's move," Varric said. "Stay sharp. We don't know what's waiting for us." The small group advanced cautiously, their boots crunching against cracked stone paths that once bustled with life. Shadows stretched long in the fading light, and the only sounds were the whistle of the wind and the occasional groan of collapsing structures. The coordinates point to the Central Research Facility, Lyra said, glancing at the Corps' pulsing display. She led them toward the largest building, a towering edifice partially buried in sand. As they approached, Orin stopped suddenly. "Wait," he said, his voice tense. He pointed to faint tracks in the dust. Varric crouched to examine them. "Recent," he said grimly. "We're not alone." Lyra's stomach tightened. "Velniks?" "Could be," Varric replied, standing. "Or scavengers. Either way, we keep moving." The entrance to the research facility was partially sealed, the heavy doors corroded but intact. Tessa stepped forward, her cybernetic fingers emitting a faint glow as she hacked the control panel. Sparks flew, and the doors groaned open just enough for them to squeeze through. Inside, the air was stale and heavy, carrying the faint tang of old machinery. Rows of terminals sat dark and lifeless, their screens coated in dust. "This place gives me the creeps," Orin murmured, his eyes darting to the shadows. "Stay focused," Lyra said. She moved to the central console, setting the iron seed core on its surface. The core flickered, and a holographic interface sprang to life, bathing the room in a cold blue light. "Harbinger activation sequence initializing," a synthesized voice intoned. "What's it doing?" Varric asked, his hand resting on his sidearm. Lyra watched as the interface displayed a complex array of symbols and diagrams. "It's looking for something," she said, her voice tinged with awe. The hologram zoomed in on a subterranean chamber beneath the facility. A faint pulse marked its location. "That's it," Lyra said, pointing. "The Harbinger." "We're not alone down here," Tessa said, her weapon aimed at a dark corridor. The faint echo of footsteps reached their ears. "Defensive positions!" Varric barked. The team scattered, taking cover behind consoles and debris. The footsteps grew louder, and moments later, a group of figures emerged, humanoid, but unmistakably Velniks. Their sleek black armor gleamed, and their glowing visors scanned the room. "Contact!" Tessa shouted, opening fire. The room erupted into chaos. Lyra ducked as plasma bolts scorched the air above her. Orin fired from behind a console, his shots forcing the Velniks to scatter. Varric moved with precision, taking out two enemies with clean, calculated shots. Lyra grabbed the iron seed core, her heart pounding. She couldn't let it fall into Velnik's hands. "Cover me!" she shouted, sprinting toward the exit that led to the subterranean chamber. Orin followed her, firing over his shoulder as they ran. "You better know where you're going," he yelled. "I do now," Lyra replied, clutching the core. The corridor leading to the chamber was narrow and winding, its walls lined with flickering emergency lights. The sounds of gunfire and shouting faded as Lyra and Orin descended deeper into the facility. "Are we sure this is worth it?" Orin asked, his breath ragged. "It has to be," Lyra said, more to herself than to him. They reached a heavy steel door, its surface etched with intricate patterns. The iron seed core pulsed brighter as Lyra approached, its glow synchronizing with the patterns. "Here," she said, placing the core into a slot in the door. The ground trembled as the door slid open, revealing a vast chamber bathed in a soft, ethereal light. At its center stood a massive construct, a fusion of organic and mechanical elements, its surface alive with shifting patterns of light. "The Harbinger," Lyra whispered. "It looks alive," Orin said, awe in his voice. As they stepped closer, the construct's lights intensified, and a voice echoed in the chamber, calm, resonant, and undeniably human. "Who dares awaken the Harbinger?" Lyra froze. "We're here to save humanity," she said. "The Velniks are hunting us, and we need your help." The Harbinger's voice grew softer, almost sad. "Humanity. A species born of fire and resilience. Yet you come seeking salvation, not understanding. What does that mean?" Lyra demanded. The Harbinger's lights shifted, forming a holographic image of the galaxy. "The iron seed is a key," it said. "Not to power, but to potential. It unlocks what your kind can become, but only if you prove worthy." "How?" Orin asked, his voice trembling. Sacrifice, the Harbinger replied. Unity. The path ahead is treacherous. Are you willing to face it? Before Lyra could answer, the chambers shook violently. Valnyx breach, the Harbinger said. Your time is short. Lyra turned to Orin. We need to activate it now. The Harbinger's lights dimmed, and a slot opened in its surface. Lyra placed the iron seed core inside, and the construct came alive with a cascade of energy. Activation complete, the Harbinger said. But the test begins now. The chamber filled with a blinding light, and Lyra felt a surge of energy unlike anything she'd ever experienced. When the light faded, she stood taller, her mind sharper, her senses heightened. Orin stared at her, wide-eyed. What just happened? Lyra clenched her fists, feeling the power coursing through her. The beginning of something new. The sound of approaching footsteps snapped her back to reality. The Valnyx were coming. Let's finish this, Lyra said, a determined fire in her eyes. She wasn't running anymore.